Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and this podcast is being recorded on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people. Where I live is the home of the people of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Mississauga people. And now the Chippewas of Nawash and Saugeen are the keepers of this land, and as someone with settler ancestors, I really aim to continue to learn and unlearn. If you are new here and wondering who I am, first of all, welcome. I'm so excited that you're here. I'm a Canadian yoga teacher, a mom of three, an entrepreneur, and just someone who's excited to continue to learn and ask questions. That's why I'm really grateful to be able to podcast, because I get to ask questions about yoga and running a business and just life in general each and every week. And I get to talk to some amazing people like today's guest. I am really grateful that you are here today so that we can learn together, because this is a topic about yoga that I don't know that much about. I'm also very excited that we are sponsored by OfferingTree, because I use and love this software in my own business because it automates everything. Bookings, payments, Zoom links, reminders, and so much more. And we have a special discount for you because you're a podcast listener. That's over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. The other hat that I wear is the founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. And this is where movement educators and healthcare professionals collaborate and get to learn the most up-to-date information regarding pelvic health. If you want to check that out, that's over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. You can join our membership and get access to every live call that we've done with guest experts from around the world. We now also have 3 yoga series in there as well. So if you want to figure out how you can bring this into your own life, into your practice, into your yoga classes, and learn more about a part of the body that not a lot of people talk about, the pelvis, visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Now let's get right into the podcast, because that's what this podcast is here for. It's here for you, the yoga teacher, because I really know how it feels to be out in the yoga world as a yoga teacher, to leave your yoga teacher training and then still have a lot of questions. So I wanted us all to have a place where we could connect to other yoga teachers, ideas, and information. Today's podcast guest has been learning and practicing yoga her whole life, but she doesn't call herself a yoga teacher, because to many people in the world, that means asana teacher. Rishima Bahadoorsingh is a Nāda Yoga teacher and practitioner. She makes the intricacies and beauty of classical Raga and traditional bhajans accessible to all, sparking love within ourselves through sound. She has sung at local cultural and charity events, yoga centers. She's done TV interviews. She's sang at festivals locally and internationally, also at weddings, spiritual centers, temples, and workshops. Rishima also teaches locally and internationally online in both Spanish and English. And you're going to hear me put like a little, by the way, connected yoga teachers, if you have any Spanish speakers in your life, or if you'd like to learn more Spanish, there's something at the end of our episode today. Rishima is a strong believer in the positive impact of music. She grew up in 2 worlds with an Indian Trinidadian family in Canada. She began singing spiritual Indian songs in the temple traditions of bhajans, Kirtan, and other devotional styles at a very young age. She's a strong believer in the positive impact of music, and she's also a mom of 2. In today's episode, I sort of realized partway through this that we've barely scratched the surface of Nāda Yoga here in this episode, and definitely on the podcast. We do have 2 previous episodes that I'll link to in the show notes. So in episode 241 and 242, we talked about Bhakti Yoga and Kirtan, and we also talked about mantra and chanting. So go have a listen to those episodes if you're like, I want to learn more about Nāda Yoga, the yoga of sound. In today's episode, we really get into the three things that Rishima teaches: mantra, raga, and kirtan or bhajan. And we talk about affirmations versus mantras. Are mantras always in Sanskrit? Do you need to know Sanskrit or be able to sing to practice Nāda Yoga? And then what about when people feel uncomfortable with mantras or chanting? Or what if Nāda Yoga wasn't covered in your YTT? Where should you go and kind of experience this part of yoga? So let's dive right into today's episode. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Rishima. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm excited that we get to talk about yoga and sound, Nāda Yoga, and all that encompasses. But before we get right into that topic, can you tell us what's the work that you do and who do you do it for?
So I do a couple of different things. My day job is actually an elementary school teacher. I've been that for over 18 years. However, I've taken the big step this year to take a break and to focus more on music and mantra and bhajan and kirtan and raga. So the topic that we're talking about today. So what I do is I teach and I sing something called Nāda Yoga. And there's different aspects to that. And I provide support to others who want to learn more information about that.
Now, it was really interesting in your get to know you form that we put out to our podcast guests. One of the questions is, are you a yoga teacher? And you had said no. And then you clarified, like, I'm not an asana teacher. Can you kind of, if people talk to you on the street and they ask you, like, hey, I heard you're a yoga teacher, or like, how do you explain to just the average person who doesn't know that there are different variations of yoga, what you do?
Yeah, so technically, I will say no, I'm not a yoga teacher because mostly in Western countries in Europe, yoga is defined as physical movements, which are based in asana. But I don't teach asana. I've actually never done yoga teacher training, formal 200-hour course. I've actually grown up doing yoga within my family. So my family come from an Indian background, and we've always done things that are part of yoga, such as meditation, such as learning about the philosophy, practicing the philosophy, doing service, singing mantras, singing bhajan or kirtan. And so this is actually, I feel like I do yoga as my life. It's not something separate from my life. It's integrated into the way I think. It's integrated into the way I act. And so I don't feel like I'm a yoga teacher because I'm just teaching you how I live. And just with the definitions of what is used today, I am not an asana teacher, but I do teach yoga in the form of music and sound.
I love this because also there are many times when yoga teachers will say, oh gosh, I have an injury, or I have a different, something is preventing me from doing my regular yoga practice. And there are so many other ways that we can practice yoga. It doesn't have to be all through movement. And so I'm excited that we get to dive into that.
Yeah, because even just as a little aside, last year, or I guess a little bit before that, I had a serious illness. So I could not, and that was due to burnout pretty much from overwork. And I couldn't move, I couldn't do anything of what we would consider yoga, such as physical asana based movements. So what I focused on is listening. And even at that point, I didn't want to listen to a mantra or anything. So I listened to something called Raga, which I'll explain a little bit later. And that's what really helped me to calm down and to focus and to heal. And I found it was a very gentle way on my body in that state of recovery. So that's something I'd love to share with you as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that story. So tell us then, what are the three parts? You and I were talking about this before we hit record. What are the three parts that make up Nāda Yoga? And am I saying it correctly as well?
Yes, exactly. So Nāda Yoga in general is just the yoga of sound. Nāda is loosely translated as sound in Sanskrit, but the word nād is to flow like a current. So there are different aspects to Nāda Yoga, and I focus on three aspects that are, I feel very public and accessible for people in the world. There are more, I don't want to say secret doctrines, private practices as well within Nāda Yoga, but I am not involved in those practices, but just to be aware that they do exist as well. So the three main components we have are mantra, then raga, and then bhajan and kirtan. So I find sometimes that either the word mantra or kirtan are used as umbrella terms to describe all things sound, but actually there are very distinct categories and differences between each one. So for example, mantra really is a series of words that have been received by the ancient yogis thousands of years ago. So when they get into this deep states of meditation and they connected to this higher states of consciousness, they would hear and they would see things. And they tried to recreate these sounds because there's such a deep energy in that state. They recreated these sounds into the Sanskrit language. So basically, the Sanskrit language are the sounds that they heard within their deep states of meditation. And within our own bodies, this may get a little bit scientific here, but within our own bodies, we have 72,000 different vibrations, which are called nadis or nerve endings, vibrations, depending on how you energy centers. And when you break them up and you divide them, so the 50 letters of the Sanskrit language actually cover a range of these 72,000 sounds because it's impossible for the human voice to reproduce that many sounds. So that's technically where the Sanskrit language came from. And then from there, these vibrations of these sounds of the Sanskrit language were put together or they were heard, and that's where we get mantra. So mantra are these sounds that we're reproducing to sort of create an effect or help us to connect to these higher states of consciousness. And that's why they're such powerful tools that we can use in our daily practice. I've been singing mantras since I was a baby. Quite honestly, my mom would whisper them in my ears as I go to sleep, and I've been using them since forever. So that's the first category. The second category is I see a question.
I just want to. Well, maybe
I just
we should
threw everything at you there.
Before we move on, I'd love to know with mantra, because I feel like there are a lot of different ways that people use that word, and I'm not exactly sure that it's all the same. So I remember learning in my yoga teacher training different mantras and using those. And then sometimes I might be reading I don't know, a self-help book or a meme on Instagram, and it talks about hey, use this mantra in this way, I don't know, repeating something over and over to yourself, maybe more like an affirmation or something. Can you talk about the difference of that?
So affirmations are actually quite different from mantra. The traditional way of using the word mantra is directly related to these sounds that were heard by these yogis. And there are very specific ways that you're supposed to repeat them. So there could be a specific melody, a specific intonation, specific pronunciation. Because even the pronunciation, I always like to give this example of the sound ba versus bha. So in Sanskrit, we have two different ways of saying a letter. So we have aspirated and unaspirated sounds. An aspirated sound has a little bit of extra air, and an unaspirated sound is just how we would normally say it. And you won't feel like if you put your hand in front of your face, you won't feel any air. But with an aspirated sound, you would feel a little puff on the palm of your hand. So an example would be ba. If I say that in a word, that syllable, it's activating the energy centers in our back. But if I say the letter bha with aspiration, that point is actually our navel. And so they're completely different spots. Even with vowels, the word which is an A sound, is our forehead. And the sound is in our entire face. So that actually changes the energetic way that mantras work within our body just by these very subtle pronunciations. Now, there are some mantras that are, just one syllable words. There are some that are a line long. There are some that are verses. And the idea of a mantra, some mantras you can say once, and that's all that's needed. There are other mantras like the Gayatri mantra, which are usually said 3 times or more. And then there are other shorter mantras like root mantras, bij mantras, or names of different deities. Those are said repeatedly in a form called japa, which is constant repetition of the name. Now, again, these are not affirmations. Affirmations are wonderful and they do work as well. But under the traditional definition of what mantra is, it's a different category. But I know nowadays within English vernacular, we use mantra for, as in that overarching umbrella term used for sort of anything that we repeat over again, whether it's in Sanskrit or English or whatever language it is. But they're actually quite distinct categories. I hope that clarified that.
So that's very clarifying. Thank you. So also to clarify, I'm sorry if I missed this. Does that mean that mantras are always in Sanskrit then and not English?
Well, within
or another language?
Yeah. So within the yogic tradition, they would most likely be in Sanskrit. So there are other traditions that have similar equivalencies to mantra, such as in First Nations cultures, such as in Hebrew or Arabic. They all have their versions of mantra within their sacred languages. So as we're specifically talking about yoga, I would say yes, they are mostly in Sanskrit. However, you do have some variations, such as in Buddhism, they could be in Pali, which is another language, or if you're in the Sikh tradition, they would be in Gurmukhi. Sorry, Gurmukhi is not a language. Sorry, Gurmukhi is a script. It could be in Punjabi or other ancient languages as well. But within the yogic tradition, it would most likely be in Sanskrit.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I feel like that's a really good, clear explanation of it. So that's number one. That's mantra alone.
Yes. That's a huge, wonderful, big topic in itself. That's just a very brief drop in the ocean.
So then number two is what?
So number two is raga. Now, raga is can be confusing, but it's actually quite a beautiful practice, and it's a musical practice. And again, this is based on the sounds that the yogis would hear in their deep meditation at different times of the day. They would start to hear melodies of nature, so melodies of the trees, melodies of the seasons. And it was based on 7 notes. So within the Indian musical system, we have sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni, and which is just like the English solfege system with do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, same idea. And they would use combinations of these notes to access the different energies and frequencies of the times of the day. So you could have a morning raga, you could have a midday raga, you could have an evening raga, a midnight raga. And so when you combine these notes, it's almost like a chemical formula. You can actually balance yourself to the frequencies of nature of that time. So to give you a bit of an example of what this all means, because it sounds nice when you talk about it, but it's very simple. So a morning raga could be the notes of, I'm going to just sing you a little bit here. Could be sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni, sa, ni, dha, pa, ma, ga, ri, sa. So then a singer or a musician, because it could be sung, it could be played on an instrument, would use this formula of notes to create a song. And then another example, for example, the opposite would be evening, could be something like Rag Yaman, which would have a different combinations of notes. And I'll sing an example for you for that as well. Ni, re, ga, ma, dha, ni, sa, sa, ni, dha, pa, ma, ga, ri, sa. So the energy and the feel of the song is completely different. The morning one is actually, the notes are trying to wake you up. It's that Shiva energy trying to, wake up, get going. You have to start your day. Then this night melody or this night mix of notes, that is now very romantic, very sweet, very loving, very connected to spirituality. That's when you're winding down. That's when all the romance happens. So that's what the songs would be composed using those notes for that. Now, the reason why this is a part of Nāda Yoga, it's beyond music, is that these songs were originally started in the temples of in India, as well as the yogis would sing them. There are these beautiful pictures of yogis with these big instruments singing ragas or playing ragas as they're wandering the forests or the mountains. This in itself is a form of Nāda Yoga. So when you sing it, you become a Nāda Yogi, so one who practices the yoga of sound. And I always offer this for people to understand because it's an excellent tool for meditation. So you don't necessarily have to sing them. We have thousands of videos on YouTube or Spotify. So for example, say you have a morning asana yoga class and you want to do a meditation session or a shavasana. So you can just literally go to YouTube and say morning raga or that's it, morning raga or raga for 9 a.m. And all of these ragas will come up, and then you just need to play them. And there are different instruments that you could hear. It could be flute, it could be sitar. There are so many varieties of instruments that you can listen to. There are also voices. I tend not to use voices when I do meditation unless I'm singing myself, just because sometimes people get distracted with different styles of voices. But what I do is when I have a meditation session, I will actually sing an entire raga, which could last about 20 minutes. It could be even 40 minutes long, 15 minutes, depending on how long you want it to be. And usually people will come in and they will sit in a meditation pose or lie down and they will listen. And the really amazing thing about raga is it's like a journey of energy going up your spine. So one of my teachers says that we always start with the lower notes. And I forgot to mention the notes that we sing are actually related again to our energetic system. So that first note is our Muladhara chakra, or their lowest chakra. And as you sing up, you're actually reaching your highest chakra, your Sahasrara chakra. So as you're either singing or listening, it's almost like the energy is getting strengthened at your base and it slowly moves up your spine. My guru used to say it's like a curled serpent at the base of your spine. And as you sing, the serpent starts going up your back to your head. And so it's a very powerful and subtle form of meditation. My gurus also used to say it's a direct form of meditation and much more enjoyable. So instead of just sitting in silence, you're actually going on a journey of sound to your meditation. And of course, the end aim after this music is that silence. Again, the goal of meditation is whether it's mantra or raga, again, we're trying to reach that state of silence at the end.
How long is that state of silence? Is there a mathematical equation, or is it just a moment of silence? Or
so again, the silence really is having no thoughts or not being affected by the thoughts within our head. For me, it could be a couple of moments. I have not been gifted with having longer bouts of that, but that's eventually the aim. The thing that I think people need to remember is that yoga is not necessarily immediate. You don't get results right away all the time. Sometimes you do, but in general, it can take years. So yoga is a very subtle practice, whether you do it through mantra or through raga or through asana or positions, everything changes subtly. And my guru also mentioned this as well. I remember one story, he was advising a yogi on a breathing technique that he was doing. And he said, if you practice this technique really well, in about 25 years, you'll have an effect. So I think it's really important to be aware. And I hear this a lot sometimes from a few of my students. They're like, well, why doesn't it happen now? I just want to say a mantra and I be cured. I just want to say a mantra and be completely aligned. And it doesn't really work that way. It could work that way, but there are so many other factors that go into this immediate cure or feeling better. It's all a process. And again, with mantra and yogic practice in general, it's about repetition. The more you do it, the more benefits you will experience.
Connected yoga teachers, I'm popping in here for a moment to tell you about the software that I use and love all the time. And this is a software that I tell other yoga teachers about all the time as well, because it makes running a business easier. And it's made specifically for yoga teachers. Just this week, I tried out a feature that's been on there for a long time. This is where you can check in students who are attending something. So students showed up online for our Zoom Yoga for Endo and Pelvic Pain series with Sarah Garden. And I love that I could just click the check-in button beside their name as they join the Zoom. And now we have the data of who attended live, and then we also will have the data of who watched the replay. So if you want to create an easy to update website or you want to get your yoga videos online in a really organized library, or if you are wanting to take payments when students sign up for your offerings, or if you want to simplify and automate your Zoom links, your email reminders, and the time zone issue that happens when you're doing online things, all of this is part of OfferingTree. It is really the best all-in-one software that I know of, and it's the most reasonably priced. The best news is that we have a discount code for all podcast listeners. Visit offeringtree.com/Shannon to grab that. Alrighty, let's get back into the interview today about Nāda Yoga with Rishima. So you were saying that you used this when you were at a place where physically you were burnt out and you decided to listen. So you were listening to these sounds then, not necessarily singing or sounding?
Yes. So it's not necessary for you to be a singer or even to understand or know Sanskrit or the different languages. And one note I should mention, within the Raga system, they have more languages, more common languages. So they may do Sanskrit or Hindi or other languages based around India. But whereas mantra specifically Sanskrit. So what I did, I couldn't sing or speak at that time. And as a singer, it was very frustrating for me to be physically unwell. And then of course that turned to being mentally unwell, just dealing with all of the illnesses that I was going through. And so what I did, I would play raga music. Initially, I started playing mantra, but for me, I felt that the mantra was too powerful at the time. So I wanted something more subtle. So I would play raga music. And there are different versions. You have the traditional styles, and then you have the more modern versions where they add a little bit of the drone sound, the new age drone sound. So I tried different ones, and that's what I would play throughout the day. And I found that just by lying down and closing my eyes, it really relaxed my body. And I found that that was my meditation. Every day, I needed to have about a 40-minute piece of music to really calm my whole nervous system down. And it worked. It did take time. I'm not going to say that it was an immediate result. At the time that I did it, it was helpful for me. I did feel more relaxed. I was able to breathe slowly, and I felt much better afterwards. And that became my meditative practice during that time.
That's amazing. So then what is the third part of Nāda Yoga?
So the third part for what I teach is bhajan or kirtan. Now, the reason why I say both of them at the same time, because depending on what area of India you're on, those words are used interchangeably. So in my tradition, we actually use the word bhajan more. And in other traditions, they would use the word kirtan. And then I've been learning more recently in some areas of India, those mean completely different things and opposite things. So in general, a bhajan are songs that it could be either poetry, it could be mantras, it could be descriptions of the deities. And these are songs to bring a connection from your heart. Kirtan, for me, is a call and response type of song. So in my tradition, I actually sing bhajans in kirtan style. So we sing songs that are call and response based on the traditional melodies as well as new melodies as well. My guru really stressed on this. So I grew up listening and singing bhajans throughout my whole life.
What about when people feel uncomfortable with Sanskrit or a different language? Let's say that we have someone who's new to yoga or just feels like, oh my gosh, what am I singing? If I don't know the meaning of this, does that mean that I'm like part of some cult or like?
That's surprisingly a very common question I get. So singing in another language doesn't mean you're converting to a different religion. So I have been to Christmas church ceremonies. They're not ceremonies, masses during Christmas time because I love hearing the choir. That doesn't make me a Christian. That just means I'm enjoying the music and benefiting from the energetic music at that time of the year. So participating in a tradition that's in a different language doesn't convert you to any other religion. As my guru really stressed, it doesn't matter what your religion is, as long as you do the best that you can in whatever religion you are in. So the idea is all religions are facets of the same truth. So at the base of all of these, that core is love, that core is this connection to the divine. Now, Sanskrit in mantra, it is in Sanskrit. So if you choose not to sing Sanskrit, that's okay. There are also different categories of songs that can be sung that are not based on deities or different. There are some that are based on philosophy or some that are just more poetic. So it's always best to choose something that you resonate with. If you don't resonate with singing a song to a deity, you don't have to do that. If you resonate more with maybe a specific philosophy or talking about light or unity, you can sing about that. Now, the one interesting thing about Kirtan, and this I'm not sure if this is specific to my tradition, but I've heard about it in other traditions as well. Kirtan and Bhajan, the whole point of them also are to be in the vernacular language. So whatever language you're speaking of is what you're going to be singing in. Traditional bhajans and kirtan were based in the raga system, so they had that energetic purpose, and they sometimes use mantras. However, I know kirtans and bhajans in English. I sing them in Spanish. I sing them in Mandarin and Japanese, and pretty much any language you have. I have heard bhajans and kirtans in those language. Even when I would go to where my guru lived in India, we would have, again, because we are in India, the majority of them would be in Sanskrit or the local regional languages of the area. But I would also hear, they would also have singers from around the world come, and they would sing in their vernacular language. So that's the power of Kirtan, is that it could be in other languages as well. And it's, again, the difference between mantra and Kirtan. Mantra is basically you have to say it a very specific way to have a very specific effect. You don't have to have any devotion. You don't have to have that. Of course, that helps. Whereas Kirtan and Bhajan is very heart related. It's your personal outpouring of happiness and joy as you sing. So it's a different effect.
This is so helpful. Thank you. If we just didn't have any Nāda Yoga in our yoga teacher training, or if we haven't experienced it ever as a yoga teacher or a yoga practitioner or student, where do you suggest we start?
Great question. I would say start slowly. So you could start with something as simple as singing Om, or there are very short mantras that you can repeat, something that you're attracted to. There are many what I call public mantras that are safe and beneficial for all, such as a name of a deity like Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I know it sounds very long, but these are simple ones that you can start off and just listen and see how that works. Even just starting off with Om. And within Om, we have three sounds. We have the Ah, the U, and the So when you're singing them, they actually, I know you can't see me because you're listening to me right now. The Ah sound starts from the back of your mouth. The U, as you just gently close your mouth, will be in the middle of your mouth. And as you completely close your mouth, you have the on the tips of your lips. So that simple mantra, just one sound long, is a great place to start. It's actually, I shouldn't say start, that is a practice in itself. It is not a beginner practice, it is a practice. So chanting Om is a wonderful way especially for beginners, because it just has those three syllables in them. And explore. You can listen to different things online. There are wonderful songs and different artists. You can go to my page as well. I have some mantras available and different short audio courses that you could listen to as well to start you off. And just explore it. Ask questions, look around. Now, one thing I want to mention about mantra, there are certain mantras that have to be sung a specific way. Then there are other mantras that can be sung with any melody and any variation. So I would always recommend starting off with, for example, names of deities, if that's something that you were exploring, because those can be sung in any way with any melody, and there will not be an unexpected effect to your body. Whereas some mantras and verses really need to be taught by a teacher. So you have the correct pronunciation and the correct intonation in order to have a beneficial effect. So start off with those simple ones, those names of deities, Om, Om Shanti, Hi Shanti, Hi Shanti. There are so many wonderful, beautiful mantras. And even for ragas, a simple Google search, you can find So many of them. And just explore, sit down and just listen.
We'll make sure to put a link to your website in the show notes. And I see that you have songs on Spotify on there. I was just looking at it today.
Yes.
And then where do our listeners go if they want to learn more from you? Are you doing teacher trainings? How do you work with people?
Yes, I do teach online as well as in person. So you can contact me for that. I do group sessions as well on Nāda Yoga. And I do the basics of Nāda Yoga. And the hope is that you have that solid foundation that you can then take what you learned and either use it in your daily practice or further your own investigations. So I have group classes. I also do private classes as well. So you can just contact me and I will be starting those more in September as it's summer holidays for us over here in Vancouver in Canada. So I'll be starting those again in September.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for all of this today, this overview and this introduction, and then getting into more details. Is there anything that you'd like to end with in terms of what you've learned through Nāda Yoga or any experience in your life where you thought like, wow, I didn't know that, or wow, this really impacted me and helped me in some way?
I think for Nāda Yoga for me is experiencing it. I have been to sessions where we would have literally thousands of people singing all at the same time. And when you feel that energy of everyone singing together, it's actually in musical therapy, it's called entrainment, when your body and the rhythms of your heartbeat all start to match. An equivalent would be listening when everybody sings the national anthem at a sports game, or you go to a musical concert and everybody's all moving their hands at the same time and jumping or singing. It's the same effect. And I really encourage people to explore this and feel what it's like. It's hard to explain, it's easier to experience it.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful if people haven't done that. I agree. See if you can find, especially an in-person event with sound. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thanks for coming and chatting with us. And if our connected yoga teachers have questions for you, we'll make sure to link to your website in the show notes, and they can also post in the show notes if they have any comments or questions. Just thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shannon.
Connected yoga teachers, I wanted to pop in here real quick just before we end today's episode because Rishima and I were talking and she was just telling me that she also does a Nāda Yoga in Spanish as well as English. So do you want to tell us just the two languages that you share this in?
Yes. So many years ago, my husband is South American. So we went to visit his family and I started to connect to people there. And I created a group on Facebook in Spanish, just for the purpose of sharing what I know with others. And it grew. So large that I quite have a lot of people who just love to learn in Spanish. So I offer courses in Spanish as well as in English. Just to note, I am not a native Spanish speaker. I've learned throughout my life. So that's available as well. If people do want to learn in Spanish as well, those courses are also available.
Oh, that's amazing. And do you still run that Facebook group?
Yes, it is in Spanish. I do have an English one and a Spanish one. So my main thing would be to go to my actual music page on Facebook. I do have it under Ray of Light Music 108. And that I usually post everything in both languages, in English and Spanish. And they have links to my larger Facebook groups there. So there's a link to the English one and there's a link to the Spanish one as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I know that there's a lot of our connected yoga teachers who will be interested in that.
Wonderful.
Thank you again so much, Rishima. I feel like we could have talked way longer about this, about Nāda Yoga and connected yoga teachers. I want to tell you that I just reached out to Rishima today to say, hey, I have some questions that we didn't even touch on about the chakras and Nāda Yoga, or the yoga of sound, or how sound impacts the chakras. And so we're talking about doing a future podcast episode. If you have questions about Nāda Yoga, including mantra, Kirtan, anything to do with sound and yoga. I would love to hear your questions. You can leave a message, leave a comment on our show notes page for today's episode. That's theconnectedyogateacher.com/346. Or you can reach out to me directly. It's Shannon at theconnectedyogateacher.com. That's my email. I would prefer if you don't email me if you want to connect, but I do check that email. I just want to say that sometimes email gets overrun with spam messages. And I know I want to hear from podcast listeners. So you can also find me on Instagram. Theconnectedyogateacher.com is a great place. You'll reach me there, or my personal Facebook. If you search Shannon Crow, The Connected Yoga Teacher, you can find me on there as well. My most favorite place, if you have questions or you just want to tell me how you're enjoying the podcast or topics you wish that we would cover, my favorite place is to hear your voice, and you can do that by leaving us a voicemail over on our website, theconnectedyogateacher.com. There's a button on the right-hand side. You can leave a voicemail. You can tell me if you'd like it played on the podcast or if you'd rather I just listen to it. I'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already done so, go leave us a review for the podcast. That really means a lot. If you would like to connect in person right now, that's happening online. We are finishing out a yoga for endometriosis and pelvic pain series with Sarah Garden. It's 7 weeks. There are replay videos if you're joining late, and it's running all the way to November the 2nd of 2023. And then those replays will still be available. So check that out. And we have some really fantastic calls coming up inside of pelvic health professionals. So this month, October, we're talking about diastasis recti. In November, we're going to talk about stress and the nervous system and how that impacts the pelvic floor. And then in December, we're going to be talking about pelvic health and cancer with Tyla, who was on the podcast. And we're going to dive in a little bit more with Tyla and really talk about the cancer community and how yoga can help, and especially when there are pelvic health cancers that are going on. And then in January, we're going to talk with Lauren O'Hayan about the pelvic floor and how that connects with our feet. So to check any of that out, visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com. The really cool thing is that you can join Pelvic Health Professionals for a month and look at all the resources that we have in there. And then you can decide, is this a place where I want to continue to learn? If so, you continue to pay like a subscription like Netflix or Amazon Prime or all of the subscriptions that are out there. Only it's all focused on pelvic health. So check out pelvichealthprofessionals.com to find out more. Thank you so much to our amazing team over here, Suzanne Crunch and Sinead, for all the work that they do in bringing this podcast to all of us. I did tell them, hey, listeners want to hear how you all are doing. So it's not easy. They're busy people. They've got a lot going on in their lives, but I do think that we should try and convince them at some point to share some update with us, tell us how they're doing or what's the most exciting thing that's happening in their life right now or something. So stay tuned, Connected Yoga Teachers. They're working behind the scenes. They're doing amazing things in this world, and someday we'll get an update from them. All right. I want to leave a question with you. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community, so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?